That's your fault.
Madam Mayor, at 6 o'clock, we're live.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this Tuesday, June 26th, City Commission Budget Work Session Number 2 to order and ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mayor Pam Triolo.
Here.
Vice Mayor Andy Amoroso.
Here.
Commissioner Scott Maxwell.
Here.
Commissioner Omari Hardy.
Here.
Commissioner Herman Robinson.
Here.
If everyone would please rise for the pledge, led by Commissioner Maxwell. Thank you. Hopping right into our budget work session. Item 3A, General and Other Funds Review, Stantec Modeling. Who shall take the lead on this?
Well, Madam Mayor and Commissioners, thank you very much. This is our second initial workshop and presentation of the budgeting process, and we have with us again tonight Letitia and Eric from Stantec, who will be running you through the modeling that you're very familiar with at this point. Tonight we're going to be covering the general fund, stormwater, sanitation, regional sewer, and local sewer funds. So without any further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to the two of y'all and let you go ahead and start with your presentation.
Good evening. Welcome back.
Good evening. Thanks for having us back. We have a couple of just prepared remarks on the preliminary. Can you hear me yet? We have a couple of prepared remarks on preliminary results. Keep in mind that we've received preliminary FY19 budgets, and so that's what we're running right now. And this is sort of a preliminary results of what we're running, and then we'll come back, like Eric said earlier, in August to review these analysis. So we're going to talk about the local sewer fund, stormwater, sanitation, general fund, and then open it up for discussion. As part of the annual process, we're essentially updating our multi-year financial management plan and updating customer demands. The operating needs and capital needs are the ones, as I just described, the preliminary as provided by staff. We're ensuring, as we look at these funds on a long-term basis, that they comply with debt covenants and reserve target policies. And we're also making sure that they are sustainable. In other words, they're maintaining or maintaining fund balances. We're growing, and cash in is higher than cash out. And then we also provide always on an annual basis a comparison of what the utility funds look like as compared to other surrounding areas of your other surrounding communities of this area. So let's go right down to it. So on the local fund, the key challenges right now is that we are hitting the 3 months of operating reserve by fiscal year 2019. And the biggest driver of that is that we've seen a significant amount of capital increase. And so if you look at the capital spending fund, you'll see the blue bars for 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22 are significantly higher than the green bars. The green bars reflect what we were looking at as far as capital in the study last year. The operating fund shows you that your fund balance has dropped to about the 3 months target in fiscal year 19. And this is also, we've made an adjustment based on discussion with staff to lower the 4 months target into a 3 months target. So this is a key challenge for the local sewer fund. Again, it's a 5-year rate increase or a 5-year capital increase of 3.6 million. And then they also get affected by larger costs coming in from the regional fund, which essentially receives costs, if you will, from the ECR. And ECR has taken on some additional projects and has taken on some additional debt. And all of that trickles down to your regional and sewer fund, the local sewer fund.
It doesn't have to do with the fact that the ECR put money into their capital fund project. So we're now passing through these rates, which is because the same thing that we're doing. We're trying to fix our stuff. They fix their stuff, but they pass down those costs to us that we can't negotiate.
Yep, they pass down the cost of operations, and then you're correct too. They also build some reserves based on their needs, and those also drive our rate increases on a local level, because you got to contribute to both.
Vice Mayor?
Remind us how long the ECR pass-through is for? What was their?
I don't think there's a time, is there?
Forever.
I know that, just to reiterate, because I know that there was a price and then it went up And then, is there a time span? What's going on there?
No, not that the price went up. What happened was additional projects were added at the ECR. Brian Shields, Water Utility Director. Yeah, as I explained last year during the budget sessions, the ECR is very similar to what you'll see tonight in Letitia's presentation on the local sewer fund. We've got this 3-year hurdle of major capital improvements, exactly at the same time as what's happening at ECR. So ECR, we've added additional projects to make sure that plant is fully functioning and meets all the regulatory criteria. They're under a consent order from DEP. So we had to pile in a whole bunch of more projects, which was $37 million more than what was originally budgeted at the $110 million solids project. So that debt is being passed along to all the entities that are members of the ECR, including Lake Worth, and then we pass those costs along to our sub-entities, which are all of our surrounding communities. So everybody shares in the debt.
So it's a 3-year project? Or
It's 3 years of major capital improvements, then it levels off to a comfortable level of R&R spending, similar to what you'll see in Letitia's charts this evening. Very, very similar timing as well.
Thank you.
Brian, is there any sort of realistic expectation that they would lower rates once they've been raised rates to cover capital projects?
No, they would stabilize. In other words, what we did at ECR was we took out short-term bank notes to pay the initial capital improvements that are coming up in the next 3 years, and then leveling those payments off by taking a shorter term of loan. Rather than take a 20-year bank loan, we took a 10-year bank loan, which will ultimately save us $10 million in interest payments over the course of the loan. So what's happening is the same thing you'll see here this evening on local sewer is you've got this 3-year spending hump, and then it levels off and then stabilizes from that point on to be strictly R&R type projects, because all the major equipment will be replaced at the plant.
Okay, I understand that the rate will actually, so will our rate actually go down and stabilize?
Letitia will show you what's
Okay.
projected for the outlying years
Okay.
to take care of this initial spending that we've got, the initial spending curve for just the next 3 years. Okay.
All right, so then based on that, our preliminary recommendations would be that this fund would essentially debt fund any non-expansion projects from fiscal year 19 to 21. And currently what we have in the budget is that would be an approximate $4 million of debt issued. The fund would implement a 7.5 rate increase from 19 to 21, and then lower that back down to 3% starting in fiscal year 22. Now, if you look at the control panel, and again, for those of you that haven't seen this, the blue bars are our current scenario, current analysis with the new preliminary updated budget, and the green bars are what we were looking at last year. So a couple of things to point out is the CIP is $3.4 million higher than it was last year. We're suggesting or recommending a borrowing for any non-expansion project, $4 million. Then we're looking at 7.5 rate increases for the first 3 years and then dropping it down to 3%. Another thing to point out here is that when we were looking at just the 5% annual rate increase for a 10-year period, we were looking at a cumulative rate increase of 62. Whereas now, when we look at 3 years of 7.5, and then we look at lowering it back down to 3%, we're actually looking at a cumulative increase of only 52% or 53%. In essence, what that means is on a 10-year period, the bill for a typical customer would actually be lower than if you kept to the 5% annual rate increase throughout the entire period. And you can see right here where it's showing you at the fiscal year 2027, you're looking at a bill of $47.24 versus what it would have been in the prior study, which was $49.29. Does that make sense?
So a 3-year increase back down to 3
On a Go ahead.
Overall, over the period of time, will actually come to keep the bills lower than it would if you would do a single increase throughout the whole time.
exactly. Yep.
Just an accelerated need of the additional rate to fund those near-term projects, but in the long run, the actual revenue in your period is less than the prior projection.
So then that's the local sewer. On the stormwater side, the key challenges are, again, maintaining operating fund balance. Although when you look at this operating fund chart, you see that the only time period in which it actually falls below the black line is in, 26, 27, 28. So it is far out enough in a projection that it's not currently a big concern. The additional capital that this fund is, I guess, having to take on this year is about $4.6 million when you look at a 5-year projection period. And you can see in the CIP chart how much bigger those blue lines are in comparison to the green lines, again, compared to what we were looking at as far as capital improvement program last year. And so moving forward, the big challenge of this fund is just this 4.6 million of additional capital right in the very first 5 years of the projection. So our preliminary recommendations are to debt fund any project that's larger than 650,000 from the period of fiscal year 19 and 22, and that would equate to about 3.4 million of total borrowing. And we would, I guess, not have a rate increase in fiscal year 19, but then implement a 3.25% increase from 20 to 28. And so here's our panel again. And so as compared to the green bars, which were last year, you can see a significant amount of additional capital, 4.6 million, the suggested borrowing of 3.4 million, and then no rate increase in 19, and then 3.25 beyond 19. And then I just wanted to point out again that because your cash in is higher, your cash out is higher than your cash in, you're using your fund balances, and closer to the end of the projection, they actually may fall below the operating reserve target. But because it's so far out, if we keep monitoring this fund, it may play out earlier, it may play out later. It's not a concern right now.
Right, and you have a 12-month reserve policy for this fund, and that's mostly due to, this is a fund that needs to respond to hurricanes and natural disasters. So that extra reserve is needed for this type of fund. But you can see in these earlier years, you far exceed that minimum policy in that black line. But the plan is to spend it down over time. And we would not look at those out years as a cautionary tale. And as we update this every year, we'll be able to monitor that and see and react to that if that was something that was creeping up on.
Yeah, and I think to add to what Eric said too, with regards to the 12 months, this is a much smaller operating cost fund. And so 12 months is really only equivalent to about $2 million. So it's a really small portion, whereas when you're looking at a 3 or 4 months in a water fund, you're looking at $2-3 million on the 3 months basis. So it's the order of magnitude type comparison.
Vice Mayor?
What if anything, touched this account during the last hurricane? Were we okay? How did it affect the ups and downs as far as the last hurricane? What kind of numbers? I'm trying to.
Yes, it really didn't impact the fund at all during the last hurricane.
Okay,
We
you've
didn't
heard me
experience
say
major flooding.
More reserves for any funds that are affected by hurricanes, and I just wanted so it's really.
In this one, we keep a 12-month reserve, so it's very, very conservative.
Thank you.
And the projects, the capital improvement projects?
Yeah,
are?
let me touch on those. The additional projects that Letitia's showing are really driven by the neighborhood road program. We have to do them in conjunction with the road program. So there's a lot of storm drainage projects that were projected in the CDM master plan that was done for the city a number of years ago. And we're accelerating those projects to make sure they're done at the same time as the road work. You don't want to have a road paved, go back in a year later and tear it up for a storm drainage job. So it's the do it once, do it right philosophy. So that's driving the upfront capital. And again, similar to the local sewer fund, you've seen that big spike for the next 3 or 4 years and then leveling off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So for the sanitation fund, again, key challenges of this one is just looking out in the longer period. Again, it's so far, we will keep track of it as we update this on an annual basis. But when you look at the expense versus revenue chart, you can see that the red line is higher than the blue line starting in fiscal year 26. And so this essentially means that you're spending more than you're bringing in, and then you'd be using fund balance.
This is clarify. That's the projected increase to spending 10 years out almost.
Exactly.
So the challenge is not today. It's similar to the stormwater fund where we need to monitor this year over year like we do in case those cash outflows start to exceed the cash inflows. But right now, that's not a situation we're worried about. It's just a future projection that may occur.
I always like to bring up too, every time we go through these modelings, that when I got here, 6.5 years ago, there wasn't even a 2-year modeling. There wasn't even a next year. It was 1 year at a time modeling. So yeah, exactly. So it's quite interesting to go that far out.
Yeah, and things will, obviously change significantly
Technology.
from what we're looking at
Yeah.
right now. Yeah. So then the recommendation for this fund is no rate increase at all, and then just perform regular revenue sufficiency, which you guys always do, to make sure that, again, as Eric was pointing out, your cash out don't exceed cash in a little faster or earlier than what we're currently projecting. So again, I just point out the cash out starting in 2026 is a little higher than the cash in. We've got enough fund balance in there to sustain us through the entire 10-year period, and so no annual rate increases.
And even as the cash outflows may start to exceed the cash inflows, you do have a healthy enough reserve balance to sustain a stabilization fund over that period of time. So rate adjustments may not be necessary even in the end of this forecast, and maybe even further out than that.
On the general fund level, the key challenge is, again, is maintaining the 2 months of O&M. We're already slightly below that 2 months at 714 or 718 or by 718,000. And in the short term, you can see that the red line is larger or higher than the green line, meaning that cash out is coming in higher than cash in. And so based on these preliminary numbers, we would see fund balances drop, I guess, all the way down to fiscal year 20, and then they start kind of coming back up in 21 through 2028. And the other key challenge is, if this is the preliminary numbers end up, well, whatever. The key challenge, I guess, is looking at when we're projecting in here that your average taxable value is going up above what we would consider a long-term average. And so if that doesn't come to fruition, the cash in is highly affected by the fact that your taxable value not grow as much as we're projecting.
And another way to state it is we're projecting 10 years of pretty good growth here. This does not simulate a recession. So if the housing market were to collapse even in a minor way, of course, these numbers would change significantly. But we are expecting in the near term a very good slug of growth in this city. We expect it to possibly even better than we have in these projections once we finalize the numbers later this summer. But we do not simulate a recession or expect one to happen within this model. It is a projection based upon a moderate growth throughout the 10-year period with the city.
I'm sorry, you said that the cash out exceeded the cash in, yet the green line shows.
Just in
I'm
those
talking about
early
just
years.
in the first.
Oh,
Yeah.
just in the first,
Doesn't work.
okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, so
It-
in 18 through 21, or maybe through 20, 18 through 20, you can see the red line is above the green, and then they kind of cross
And
at
you-
around 20, and then they become,
Yeah, and you can see here that utilizes your fund balance to fund that deficit here through fiscal year 2020. But once growth starts to materialize to the extent that your ad valorem and major revenue sources of intergovernmental funds that get allocated to you based upon population and development within the city, once that starts to really compound, you'll see that our projections of cash inflows will start to exceed your cash outflows, and that fund balance will start to be built in these out years. But the challenge will be just holding the steady course in the near term and making sure that reserves aren't going to be used much lower than this. And we're going to be working with your staff over the next few months to make sure how the numbers come out. You're going to get firm numbers from the property appraiser July 1st. You start to understand the intergovernmental revenue allocations, and we'll figure out going forward how this can be managed in the next few years.
Vice Mayor?
Real quick, so everything's been going up the last couple of years. We didn't go up quite as much so far this year as we did last year. But I see that you have 888 across the board. So we can feasibly predict that in the next couple of years we may do better than that.
Could be, yes.
But
And this is a typical curve we would apply to the general fund. For what I said before, while we're not projecting a recession, it would be dishonest for us to say you're going to grow 10% for 10 years.
correct.
We would not want to provide a financial outlook that we wouldn't reasonably think or any economist would stand behind. So what we do show is a robust growth, continued growth, just at a lesser pace out here. And you can see we stop at 6%, and if 6% is the average in those out years, you're still doing great. It may be better than this 9.5, 8, 8, 7. And if that is the case, you'll see a little bit better uptick in those revenues. But you also have to keep in mind that your ad valorem revenues don't fully fund this fund. It's only a portion. I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but a little bit more increase in ad valorem is not going to switch those curves immediately, but it will provide for better sustainability in the future. And our overall projection here shows that this is going to be a sustainable fund in the long term, as long as costs don't outpace your potential growth in revenues. But right now, all we know is potential growth in revenues and the certainty of June 1st estimates, and then we'll know better in July 1st.
Commissioner Hardy?
Yes, so just a few questions, I guess. This doesn't factor in a homestead exemption increase?
Yes, sir, it
It
does.
does.
It does?
Yep.
Okay.
And one of the big issues that this city and every other city that we consult with throughout the state is bracing for is the passing of this legislation. We would not tell you to prepare for it to not pass. We have the exemption baked into this model, and the lost revenue for that also accommodated. So that is part of this assumption.
Okay, and the other thing, I guess, is the nexus between this fund and the electric fund, which we discussed last time, and we kind of said that we would, I guess, visit that when we get there.
And it's really a nexus with all your funds. All of your enterprise funds provide a transfer for administrative services that your general fund provides, as well as payment in lieu of franchise fees, which is very typical of cities to accommodate for their funds. And it's a transfer to this fund, and it's a significant revenue source for the general fund. And we showed no change in that yet until policy is made to change that.
Why would you show no change if we haven't made a policy decision to address the issues that we learned about the electric fund? That would obviously affect either rates or, the money that the electric fund pays into the general fund.
Right now, the policy is the 8% transfer, and until that changes, we're not going to show you any different, or we could show you what the effect of that would be, but
So- Well, so what you're saying is that this model for the general fund implies some other action on our part
no,
as regards to the
sir.
election
No,
fund.
this implies that as things are today would carry forward.
But we
City
lear-
manager, do you want to answer?
Well, if I understand, the 8% that we see coming over from the utilities
Mhm.
has been what we've put into the base numbers. And until such time as we get both the solid numbers on the electric utility, for example, and see where we are coming into honing the budget on the general fund, it's hard to start to play with those numbers, because you're going to either exacerbate the problem in the general fund, which has very limited options, or you're going to overburden the electric fund. So it's a balancing act that we've been doing every year since I've gotten here, at least. And that's not something we're asking you to actually address just yet, just to be aware of it. As we have our next meeting, we're going to be talking about some of those policy areas that we believe we need to get direction on, to make any changes necessary to balance the budget. Does
And
that
And
answer your
ironically,
question?
municipal governments are forced by law to balance their budgets each year, yet the state and federal governments are not.
The difficulty we face in Lake Worth is the general fund has always suffered, if you want to say that, for a variety of reasons. And our tax base, before the height of the Great Bubble, we were at over a $3 billion valuation. And we dropped to almost 900 million. And we're back up to about $1.6 billion. But the costs associated with the general fund, almost half of our budget goes for police services, which is not unusual in cities. I don't want you to think that that's an abnormal figure, but it's a large number for us. And then you throw on projected insurance costs and all the various things that are sort of out of our control. It makes it really hard to balance that budget. So for me to recommend that we start cutting that 8% down would be something I would,
I'm not,
at this
I'm not,
point.
I'm not saying that that's, the recommendation, but the last we heard was that there was a significant hole in the electric fund and that there were options that involved either rates or a cut to the payment into the general fund, or a substantial cut to expenses in the electric fund. And I understand that we're working on that. But, I guess, my question is, we haven't made decisions about, significant cuts to expenditures in the electric fund, and we haven't made a decision about, rates. And so, my question is, being as we haven't made a decision about either of those two things, the one other option is not reflected here, even though it would affect this fund.
Well, the information is that the last information that was given, it was told that all the numbers weren't in from the department. So the next time we look at the fund, we're gonna see an updated report. Remember, when we go through the budgeting process, it's a moving target, because the numbers are being input weekly, daily, whatever they may be. They were not in yet. In fact, it was a late process on getting the numbers to you, which was described by Stantec.
We schedule these meetings, Madam Mayor, well in advance, and we try to hit these as best we can with making sure the numbers are honed as much as possible. I can already tell you the electric utility numbers have changed. It's not, there's not the shortfall that was presented, because we've already found some better numbers that we were working with. So we're honing in on that balanced budget. I don't
We'll
need
have to make
I don't need you to necessarily jump off on a policy direction on a moving target.
That I understand. It just would have been nice to see the implications.
Yeah, this is a snapshot in time, very preliminary numbers, and we need to present it as status quo right now.
Right.
And this would be the outlook as the numbers are today. And once we receive the updated numbers, we'll be able to reflect that, and then we'll be able to play with that interplay between the funds.
We'll actually be seeing, when we get closer to the end of the budget process, we'll be able to see, we'll have all of the numbers in towards the end of the budget process, and we'll actually be able to see how one fund or one department affects another department through his modeling.
Yeah.
And that's when we talk about policies.
It would not be honest for us to bring up the electric fund as it is right now and interplay with the general fund when we know the numbers are currently being worked on.
Okay.
Yeah, well, once they're all in and all done, then they show us if you did this or increased that or lowered that, and they see how it affects every single fund, and then we look at it as a whole when it's all the numbers are.
I certainly would like to see that.
Oh, we will. That's part of it. Commissioner Robinson?
I was wondering about this found, this lost and found department that we have in the numbers. I just, I'm trying to understand going forward that we're working towards equipment that needs to be replaced. But if the rates don't matter if the lights aren't on, and I was thinking that the electric budget is going to be less flexible than our general fund. And I certainly want to keep the lights on. I think that's one of our jobs.
Can we stay in the budget focus people
Well,
here?
I thought-
You know what? It's a budget conversation, so let's talk about the budget, all right? Thank you. It's numbers. It's about numbers. We're not in the electric fund right now, are we? No, we're not. City manager? We can have a discussion next commission meeting, and we shall. Okay.
So I guess based on current projection status quo as where we are, we would be looking at potentially 6 years of below the target fund balances, but then they would come back up. Again, just the above average long-term property value increases, and then this just includes no adjustments for the 10-year period, this projection. And this is all that we had pretty much prepared for discussion with you all. Further questions, comments?
And just to reiterate, we're going to be coming back in August with the newly loaded models for 2 meetings with the final budget numbers. So keep in mind, right now it's a snapshot in time. It's all preliminary, and we're working with your staff to update them and make sure the solid information is going to be presented to you at that time, to where decisions can start to be made. We'll have the models ready to go by then. Right now, this is just kind of where we're at in the process, and it's a snapshot in time. So keep that in mind as you digest these numbers.
Ms. Mayor?
When we come back in August, will we see all funds? So we'll be able to cross over and be able to
Start to do that
make those
maneuver?
I'm going to rely upon your city manager to tell us how we're going to arrange the funds per meeting, if we're going to just kind of look at them all at once or piecemeal, but we're going to have them all ready to go at the discretion that you guys would need.
And city manager, I personally would like to see everything in one
The-
meeting, because we've already gone over everything.
Sure.
And, we've been asking questions tonight that cross over into multiple funds. I'd like to be able to see the multiple funds and be reminded, so we can ask those questions. some of the funds don't really
In,
matter when you cross them over, but a few of them do.
Like Commissioner Hardy just
And
mentioned,
like
right?
Commissioner Robinson.
and Madam Mayor, it was our intent to have also a more of the policy discussion next month. We're having some scheduling difficulties with your schedules to get at some of these issues that you're talking about here, so that would be part of the process as we go into the next generation of presentations from Stantec. So it's not just waiting till August. We were trying to have some of those discussions before then in July.
You'll see in July
'Cause we'll-
to everyone listening at home and here at home, some of our meetings next month, because of scheduling issues, will be on, I think one of them will be on a Wednesday and one will be on a Thursday instead of a Tuesday. So I just want you to check our schedule for that. If you'd like to be a part of it, I definitely want to make sure that you know that there'll be 2 meetings on off days during the month of July, just so that you check the schedule on that, just so that we can have the meetings and not miss them. And then also to look back to, for people that are just experiencing the budget process with us this year, maybe not last year or the year before, take a look back at the minutes of previous year's meetings of it, and you'll see the presentation and how we're going through it. They've been done much the same way, where the items are presented and we look at them and then we discuss them. The items get added, we add to them. We're not doing anything different than we've ever done before in the past, other than the fact of the numbers are different, every single year. It's the process, and then once we get down to the nitty gritty and staff has all the numbers in and have made the appropriate recommendations based on where our budget needs to be, then guess what? Then we sit there and we make tough decisions at the end. But if you take a look at the video or the audio, or listen to the audio or the minutes from those meetings, it's much the same process. Nothing has been done any differently. And these guys have even been here for Lord knows how many years.
This is the same process. We come in, we say, here's a snapshot now. We come back when the final budgets are ready, and that's when final recommendations and your decisions get to
So
be
we're
made.
not gonna have a meeting on the 9th.
Mr. Hardy?
Yeah, I just want to say, I didn't expect to have a policy discussion here, and if by policy discussion we mean a discussion where we gather consensus and figure out what to do. But if we're going to discuss the general fund, the electric fund is an input to what happens there, and if we can't have and there are assumptions about what happens with the electric fund baked into what we just saw, right? And if those assumptions don't hold, or if we can't discuss those assumptions because we don't have complete information, then we can't have a complete discussion about the general fund. I just thought that we would have had this already today, because we looked at a projection about the general fund, but there are key assumptions here that are up in the air, and that's
And these
But that's
these
part
meetings are scheduled, and it's a process to show you the information as it's being generated. We don't have all the numbers yet. This is what we have at this point. Flipping back and forth to run hypotheticals for a possible maybe is sheer academics exercises, and I don't know that that's fruitful for the purposes of generating a budget.
Mr. Robinson?
Well, just for academic purposes, could we talk about taking 7% from the electric fund instead of 8? I mean, I said that the general fund is important, but I would think that it's more flexible than
I think
equipment replacement.
Commissioner Robinson, Madam Mayor,
Mhm.
it's more productive to get it truly what your issue is, which is you want to see a significant investment in capital improvement in the electric utility because you perceive that that's lacking. That's the policy debate, not the 8%. And that's a set of issues that are part of the budget discussions, but it's not necessarily part of the 8%.
So when will we have those discussions? That's what I'm.
You're going to be up to your hip pockets as the electric utility authority, and you're going to be given a full regular dosage of electric utility from here on out, because with the power purchase agreement, the major investments that need to be made, we've reached the critical points this year for that to ramp up and to happen. So that's parallel to the budgeting process. Because we're going through this annual process doesn't mean that you can't borrow money based on logical data and invest it throughout the year to address these issues. But sometimes I think we want to make a turn before we get to the intersection, and all that happens is you end up in the ditch. So you got to, I've been trying to divine exactly what your concern is, and it's well-founded, but addressing it by having an argument over the 8 or 7% may not be the place to have the,
A discussion is different than an argument, I hope.
Point taken.
point taken.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
That was a quick discussion.
But you already knew the answer.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Nobody wants to adjourn? As nobody has any questions and nobody wants to adjourn? Okay.
Still,
You're looking still?
I can come back.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor state so by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
I'll oppose.
Opposed adjourning? Okay.